What's going on, everybody? Jigan here, and we are finally back with more Hajime no Ippo discussion. And as much as I wanted to review each chapter individually heading towards the conclusion of this fight, I thought it'd be a much better analysis for me to just wait and review the fight in bulk and just give you my thoughts overall. So I'm going to be covering, basically giving a summary of my thoughts on what the build-up for this fight was like, as well as the first half, and then dive deeper into a second half analysis discussion. I also did a video on my thoughts on Sendo vs Gonzales so far, as well as a chapter 1303 review individually, so if you'd like to check those out, I'll put the links in the description. So to start, I'd like to say that this fight has been built up beautifully, easily some of the best in the series thus far. Alfredo Gonzales is a character who's considered an uncrowned king. He's one of the best and most versatile boxers in the series, whose only L's have come from the undefeated featherweight champ himself, Ricardo Martinez. And as great as Alf's career has been, he just ran into someone that much greater, a man who actually inspired him and essentially saved him from the streets, brought this beast into the ring, and Alf's lifetime goal since then has been to repay him by surpassing him, to chase his idol and give him the fight of his life, which his girlfriend Lisa disapproves of. She thinks that Alf's feelings have already been reached and that there's no point in trying to pay back anything anymore, that enough has been enough, because unfortunately Ricardo has been way too far out of reach for Alf. This type of thing is common in most sports. So many amazing athletes have never gotten to taste the pinnacle, not because they themselves aren't great, but because the opposition was just otherworldly great. They are just too damn good. Think how many amazing athletes were denied this because they ran into the Michael Jordans, Tom Brady's, and Floyd Mayweathers. The list goes on. Alfredo is also somebody who gave Ippo a reality check on how strong the world stage actually is, obviously being the one who ended Ippo's incredible win streak. Ippo got a taste of the world stage, but the first of his generation to actually have success on it was Volk, which was a fight that really showed Ippo and Sendo what it takes to succeed on that level, what it means to cross the line, as Takamura said. And you can tell it really inspired these guys so much that it basically led to them having a full-on fight after what was supposed to be a spar. So obviously the idea of Sendo, one of Ippo's main rivals, fighting Gonzales, warranted massive excitement throughout the fandom. The idea that Sendo, who is 0-2 against Ippo in the ring, can gain a 1-up in this rivalry by defeating somebody who Ippo himself lost to, and also be the one to challenge Ricardo before even Ippo, who Date entrusted the future of the Japanese featherweight division to. And we know Sendo's goal is Ricardo Martinez. He's been going all in on this goal for a while now, fighting many impressive Mexican boxers like Jose Nargo in hopes of getting used to the Mexican style of boxing, climbing the ladder in hopes of facing Ricardo. But of course, on that journey, running into Alfredo is inevitable. Another very important aspect to the build-up of this fight is the direction Ippo's character is heading, and how they both impact each other as rivals so much. And if you take a look at the spar that these two had prior to the fight, it gives us some pretty heavy implications of this. Ippo in the spar is not going very hard. He's being more casual, just trying to warm him up. But Sendo is annoyed by this. He fights like he has some sort of chip on his shoulder, and in my opinion the reason for that is because he hasn't let go yet. He hasn't quite let go of the idea that his rival is no longer there. Hasn't let go of challenging the man who already defeated him twice. And that to me is the driving force of Sendo's character, strength. Arguably the main theme of the series in general, and each boxer in the series goes about pursuing this strength in a different way. What does it mean to be strong? And for Sendo, it's setting his eyes on a strong opponent and relentlessly pursuing them no matter the cost. And that is why he's fixated on Ricardo right now. He's striving for the pinnacle, but he obviously still respects Ippo greatly as the only man to give him an L in the ring. And so when Ippo eventually is able to close in on him during the spar, he is infuriated by Ippo pulling back his punch, which results in the spar being stopped after Sendo completely rocks his shit, which then leads to another conversation between Sendo and Yanoka. And this talks about how Sendo alludes to Ippo being off his game in their previous spar after Volk's title match, obviously referring to Ippo's punch-drunken state at the time when Sendo pretty much whooped his ass. But Ippo was a lot sharper this time. What they noticed was that in the spar, Ippo improved a lot of his physical attributes, such as hand speed, step-ins, more crisper cuts. The accumulated damage he had from all the matches prior really messed with his senses. But it is possible that time off can alleviate stuff like that, which is why he looked a lot better here. Ippo has been avoiding taking massive damage lately in his new role as a trainer, but he still kept up a very heavy training regimen even as a retired boxer, so it does make sense that they could notice some of these improvements. Ippo was also reflecting on how much he's learned during this experience so far. Physical preparation such as weight control, the overall mental preparation, how fighters have so many unique and different methods for this, the hardships of being in a hostile road environment without your usual home routine, all of which is important for him to come back as somebody much more knowledgeable and prepared to take on the world stage. But to me, the main point of this conversation is really to highlight that it doesn't matter how much someone improves physically if they don't have a sense of purpose. Coming back without a true reason to fight is just setting yourself up for failure. After this, Sendo claims Ippo has gotten weaker, which proves he fully understands this, that Ippo does not have this motivation yet, which means he's not worthy to fight him right now. So he's moving on and is now fully locked into the fight against Alfredo Gonzales. So as you guys can see, this fight is so important not only for Sendo moving on from Ippo in his pursuit of Ricardo, but for Ippo himself to see the bigger picture as a fighter and find that spark to get back in the ring. So one of my favorite things about the first half of this fight is how well Morikawa established the atmosphere. The introductions were raw, the crowd was hyped, and not only hyped, but they understood what kind of fight this was going to be right off the bat. They appreciate Sendo and what his fighting style embodies. They love Sendo just like they love previous Japanese boxers who also had a Tiger persona. And Sendo embraces this. He's the type to get even more motivated in a hostile road environment. Someone who's cut from a completely different cloth from the rest, with that Mamba-like mentality, as shown when he doesn't touch gloves but decides to get straight to business. And in that first 2 rounds, it was pretty clear that Alfredo was the superior boxer. He constantly was hitting him with his calm and collected lefts that were just coming from every single angle, which of course is what Mexicans specialize in. They are known for their very tricky lefts that really mess with you. And Sendo was pretty much just swinging and missing at everything, unable to counter any of these hits, which made him realize how much Alf is a step above the other Mexicans that have helped him prepare for this. But Alf is a little perplexed by Sendo's obvious and full swings. Like, why is he coming at me with such telegraphed movements and stepping into counters without a single ounce of fear? And even with Alfredo's early success, he can see why Sendo is such a dangerous opponent. Ippo comments that the reason for that are his animalistic instincts and ability to adapt mid-fight. Sendo also mentions Mashiba, Japan's Grim Reaper, and how he was a lot tougher than what Alfredo is giving him right now. I really like how he mentioned Mashiba here. A lot of times they're highlighting the opponents they had in Japan that has kind of groomed them and hardened them for the next stage. Similar to how Volk had a reflection like this back when he was fighting on the world stage, he looked back at his Japanese rivals Sendo and Ippo and how they sharpened him. He fought the most durable shield and the strongest spear. The pure toughness of the men who come from the land of samurai. And it's been highlighted even more in this fight, even by Ricardo himself, who we know has had a lot of respect for Japanese fighters from his experience with Date. And in my opinion, Ricardo has been giving a similar respect to Sendo. Ever since they sparred, it seemed like his interest in him has been growing. He seemed to think Sendo had some mysterious aura surrounding him, like he was capable of creating some sort of miracle in the ring. And what happened was exactly that to some extent. Sendo made Ricardo go down in a spar. I mean, to me, it seemed pretty obvious that Ricardo just slipped, but it was interesting how adamant he was about that not being the case. That the Tiger, that Sendo, was the first one to bring him down in a spar. He kept emphasizing that. And I think the idea of fighting Sendo intrigues him more than any other potential matchup in a long time. He even favors Sendo when talking about the direction of the fight, which him and Alf's coach seemed to differ on. Ricardo believes that this was a mistake for Alf, to not go all out from the start, and teaching manners, attempting to teach manners to Sendo, a wild tiger, is impossible. He described what Sendo was trying to do as not a provocation or threat, but instead an invitation to brawl, an invitation to slug it out with Alfredo. But Alfredo's coach, on the other hand, thinks that making this a slugfest is a mistake on Sendo's part, that bringing out Alf's natural way of fighting, the way he grew up fighting, will only benefit Alfredo. So this difference in opinion is very interesting. He claims that they needed to suppress this violent nature from Alfredo because it was easily countered by the calm and collected Ricardo Martinez, and that in the fight against Ippo is when Alf had finally ascended, that he finally developed this perfect balance of bloodthirsty savagery and world-class techniques, a hybrid form that could take down Ricardo. And as the fight is approaching these middle rounds, we start to see Alf go into his Metzling mode. He accepts the invitation. He's giving Sendo what he wants. And that's to stop fighting like a calculated honor student and just slug it out in the ring with him. Which leads us to seeing Alf start to overpower Sendo once again, until an unpredictable uppercut sends him flying. And this was just a hint of what's to come later in the fight with Sendo's unpredictability, as we see how amazing Sendo's instincts are and how great his ability to adapt is, as well as how great his destructive power overall is, which is another thing that Ricardo was praising earlier, that Alf was throwing precise 1s and 2s, which would hit him very often, but Sendo would try to counterbalance this with an 8 or a 9 on the power scale. That he's somebody who can change the entire dynamic of the fight with just one punch. And I think the first half of this fight masterfully establishes what needs to be done for Sendo. That for the first time, he's facing somebody a lot better than himself, and it will take some major evolution to win. Something that you can't train for or properly prepare for. That only comes with the experience on the biggest stage in the brightest lights. And something that I didn't actually quite expect this much was how much characterization he gave Alf in this fight, and honestly became something that I appreciate almost as much as anything about this fight. That he established these two boxers, Alf and Sendo, as being one in the same. A man who's also from the streets, depicted as wild animals with a ferocious fighting style. Alfredo is having fun fighting somebody who's built from the same cloth as him. He's having so much fun at one point that he even forgets about Martinez for a little bit. He forgot what he spent so many years working towards, because he's having so much fun fighting this man. He lost track of the man who saved him and brought him into the ring, and presumably this has never happened to him before. That is how much Sendo has impacted him during this fight, and it leads to a very satisfying conclusion later on, which in my opinion was the perfect way to end his character arc, which we will get into in a little bit. And without coming to this realization in the 4th round, it's become an all-out slugfest. He knows he has to beat Sendo down right here and now. He has to give him everything he's got. He's got to beat him until he's unconscious, because he knows somebody like Sendo is never going to quit, and he's going to continue to evolve as the fight moves on. And what this does is lead to an intense barrage of punches thrown by Alf, one of my favorite parts in the entire fight, and an amazing quote that summarizes this perfectly. While we may have machismo, the samurai of Japan have their Yamato Damashi, and to me this perfectly encapsulates the respect between the Japanese and Mexican boxers, comparing the masculine beliefs of Mexican culture with the unwavering spirit and determination that the Japanese possess. The artwork in this fight is phenomenal. The impact panels, the choreography, and overall depiction of rawness is just constant throughout the fight, and these fighters continue to reach peak performance as we get later on. Sendo is starting to put a number on Alf eventually, who's starting to get a little more wobbly. Alf is not quite as durable as somebody like Sendo, who's fighting in this manner all the time. Sendo has fights like this all the time, whereas Alfredo is more calculated. Alfredo does have the Metzling mode. The beast can come out, but that is not all the time. Sendo is used to these kind of slugfests. And this leads us to another major turning point of the fight, and that's the cliffhanger at the end of chapter 1303, when Sendo's glove tape comes loose, and it resulted in temporarily stopping the match. But this was much more than just a troll by Morikawa. He allowed Ippo to have a very good moment showing off his newly gained experience as a second, as well as showing us just how much he understands Sendo as a person and fighter. Just before this, you see Hoshi, who's one of Sendo's seconds and also a pupil of his, try to use this opportunity to stall and allow Sendo to rest, since he's taken a lot more accumulated damage than the opposition. But Ippo immediately realizes that it's not the right thing to do. Not because of some honor code or whatever, but because he knows Sendo. He knows the type of fighter he is, who heavily relies on momentum during fights, and that cooling him off now could be detrimental to his success. And looking back on this, I truly believe Ippo lit a fire under him and made a difference in this fight with this call. It's very possible Sendo might have lost had this not happened. Alfredo also is able to realize how important Ippo is to Sendo's growth, why he never goes down, why he never gives up, and that's because Ippo's punches prepared him for this. His rivalry with Ippo molded him into the fighter he is today. And in chapter 1305, the intensity only continues, Alf obviously having the numerical advantage when it comes to punches landed. But Sendo's already ridiculous punching power continues to evolve, stepping into counters without fear, continuing to be unpredictable and adapting the later we get into the fight. Even when the swings are obvious and predictable, Alf can't help but be wary of them because he knows all it takes is one punch to send him good night, man. Sendo is a freaking monster, and he actually broke his fist during this chapter, but you know he's not going to quit. This doesn't mean shit to him because he's going to give it all he's got until he drops. This relentlessness is taking a toll on Alf, and I find it funny now that Alf is actually the one who is settling for duel exchanges, and his pure counter hasn't been nearly as effective, whereas earlier in the match Sendo kept getting countered, and he was the one who was trying to barely survive and get by with duel exchanges. And these exchanges continue to be brutal. They are developing such a mutual respect for one another, and honestly, it's been a while since we've seen a fight with such brutality. Probably, in my opinion, not since Mashiba vs. Sawamura. So, heading into the final chapter of this fight, they're just beating the dog shit out of each other straight up. And it begins with a straight exchange of lefts, and it's honestly anyone's ballgame at this point. Both are wobbly. Both can barely stand. And Sendo's fist is just an absolute train wreck. But even so, he's cocking up a massive right, even though he wants to pass out. And Ippo notices this. He notices that Gonzales is about to go for the same counter that slept him in their fight. And Gonzales is on the ropes with this. He can feel the overwhelming pressure of Sendo's fist, but he gathers the resolve and confidence to fight back. He wants to show him what machismo truly is. They both connect with the right, and Sendo appears to be going down, but of course, once again, the Tiger's unpredictability strikes. A left uppercut from a crazy angle finally finishes Gonzales off. Sendo won. Man, it's crazy. It's crazy how far we've come. With Vold already winning a world title, Sendo has now earned the right to challenge for one as well. But of course, it will be a lot tougher of a challenge against the undefeated, undisputed champ, Ricardo Martinez. And I pray his fist is alright. But I wouldn't be surprised if there are some serious repercussions there. This shit is hurting him so bad, he can barely stand. You see Alf come over and try to congratulate him, which is dope. You know, the mutual respect they've gained for one another is really, really cool. Alf also says that Team Alf is disbanding. It seems to me that he's officially retiring, that he has now gained the satisfaction. He fought someone who brought out his true self and is now satisfied with letting go of Ricardo Martinez. And I love how the kids who are watching on TV say that this is not the end of Team Alf, which I assume meaning that they are going to train and inherit his dream for him. The crowd also continues to cheer for Sendo, further showing their respect and admiration for him and his fighting style. As Sendo thanks the crowd and heads off, we see Ippo kind of have some reflection on the fight, that he was knocked out by the exact same right counter that Sendo was able to withstand. And he thinks that there's a limit, a definitive limit to how much you can withstand. Punching power, speed, stamina, those things can all be trained and increased. But he doesn't seem to think that there's much you can do to just improve upon simply how much damage you can take. So what does this mean for Ippo exactly? Well, we obviously know that his style takes way too much damage. Ippo takes an absolute fuck ton of damage. And he's not exactly the unpredictable athlete that Sendo is. He can't exactly do all that crazy shit that Sendo does. So in my opinion, I think Ippo needs to work on being a more calculated boxer. Find the perfect balance. Kind of like what Alfredo had. We obviously didn't see that tonight against Sendo because Alf pretty much accepted the invitation to fight in a brawling style like Sendo. But I think if Ippo is ever going to return to the ring and be able to take on Ricardo eventually, he's going to need to develop his own sort of hybrid style. His combining the guts and determination he has, the power that he has, with some more calculated boxing, some better footwork, the ability to avoid more damage. I think Ippo needs to become the complete package and overall mature more as a boxer and take these lessons to heart. And it might take a Sendo versus Martinez match to fully inspire Ippo's comeback. And we know that Alf, he changed his style, right? Because he kept getting countered by the calm and collected Martinez. So, with Sendo's style going up against him, what are we going to see? It seems that the style does not work on Ricardo. It seems it's probably going to be the case that Ricardo dominates him, and Ippo might have to witness this. I don't know exactly what or exactly when Ippo's comeback is going to happen, but I definitely think that this overall experience in Mexico for him and the fight between Sendo and Gonzales was a major step forward. And I absolutely think, based on everything, the build-up, the tension, the intensity, artwork, choreography, the list goes on, this fight checks the box in almost every single category. And in my opinion, definitely warrants an argument for a top 5 fight in the series. So let me know what you guys thought of this fight. Do you guys think this fight is arguably top 5? What do you think of the conclusion of Alfredo's character arc and where Sendo goes from here? Also let me know what you think needs to happen in order for Ippo to make a comeback. And also just give me opinions on anything related to the series. Let me know if you have any sort of predictions whatsoever. I'll be listening to all of them. And once again, I greatly appreciate all you guys who watched this today. Ippo is definitely very fun to talk about. It's not always the most dense, so sometimes chapter reviews every single week are kind of hard, but talking about major fights in bulk and just the series in general is something that I love to do, and I plan to make a lot more videos on Hajime no Ippo overall. So if y'all could drop a like, subscribe, and just continue to stay tuned into the channel, I'd greatly appreciate it. I'm Jagan, and I'll see you guys next time.